You're listening to The Corbett Report. CorbettReport.com.
Welcome back to the broadcast, friends. Welcome back to Corbett Report Radio. I'm your host, as always, James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, and I'm coming to you tonight, as every night, from the sunny climes of Western Japan. So thank you for tuning in for tonight's broadcast, and as I mentioned at the end of last night's broadcast, this is going to be a very interesting conversation indeed. Tonight we have on the line with us from California, Peter Kirby, an author and researcher who has written extensively about chemtrails and the various ways that they've been used for various different agendas. So we're going to be starting to explore that information tonight, and really rolling up our sleeves and getting the skinny on what's happening with this weather manipulation and all of the other ramifications of this chemtrailing experiment that's taking place in our skies even as we speak. So Peter Kirby, it's great to have you on the program tonight. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start by talking just a little bit about yourself and how you got into this. As I understand, you've been doing this for a couple of years now, but you also have a book for sale, Chemtrails Exposed. Let's talk a little bit about the work that you're doing.
Right, that's my ebook. It's available exclusively at Amazon.com, and it's an evolving work with each paper that I write on the different aspects of this topic. I add to the book. So it's about 7 or 8 chapters right now. All these papers have been published on alternative media outlets. And right now I'm working on a chapter about who is doing it. You know, this is the big kahuna, actually. You kind of went for the throat with that question right there. Because Michael Murphy has also announced that his next movie will be about who is doing it. I believe he is, on the cutting edge of this type of research. I mean, that's what I wondered when I first started getting into this. It's like, wow, you just see a plane flying over and it's obviously emitting something, and that's all you have to go by pretty much. And even when you would go on the internet and look at some things, there's really just tons of disinformation out there about this. It's as bad as the UFO thing, They've really pulled out all the stops on the PR campaign on this one.
Unfortunately so, and it's so easy to clutter up these the airwaves with disinformation and misinformation, so that is a favorite tactic of theirs in trying to throw people off the trail. For those out there who don't know Michael Murphy, of course, the filmmaker behind What in the World Are They Spraying and Why in the World Are They Spraying, and a previous guest on CorbettReport.com, so I hope you'll check into the archives for that. But Peter, how about yourself personally? How and when did you start coming into this information?
How did I hear about it? Well, I wrote about that in one of my papers. I started just by, really the whole 9/11 thing is what got me into it. When I realized that something was wrong about 9/11, I realized it was an inside job, basically. And so I said, wow, there must be a whole world of information out there that I am not aware of, because I had just listened to the mainstream media before. I believed the official story, and but when I realized it was all phony, it woke me up, and I think 9/11's actually woken up a lot of people. And it was so I started looking at all these different things in the alternative media, and the first time I heard about this chemtrail thing, I thought it was a bunch of nonsense. I thought, oh, that's ridiculous. Why would they, spray everything and everybody? Because everything and everybody is interconnected, and their families are going to get sprayed, and their properties and their land, and everybody's everything is being destroyed and killed. That didn't make any sense to me, and but as I looked into it further, I realized that there was only one conclusion, as to what this was, and that is that there was something desperately wrong with these planes flying over, spraying us. You can observe it for yourself.
Unfortunately so, yes, on a daily basis, depending where you are. We're going to take a short break. We're up against our first break. We'll be right back after these messages. All right, welcome back to the program, friends. Once again, we are talking to Peter Kirby, an author and researcher who has written a book called Chemtrails Exposed, available through Amazon.com. He's also contributed to numerous websites, including Activist Post, and we're going to be talking about at least one particular article that certainly caught my attention that was posted to Activist Post on August 2nd of this year, Geoengineering for Financial Gain, a History of Weather Derivatives, a very fascinating study with lots of very useful information in there. So if people want to play along at home, they can type that into your favorite search engine, hopefully not Google, and find that article on Activist Post. And absolutely, there's a lot of information there, and in some of the other articles that he's written. Peter, just to be sure, you don't have your own website at this time?
I do not. I did at one time. It was actually for something else, but that was peterakirby.com. Maybe I'll resurrect it at some point. Right now, I'm just farming the work out to Amazon, and they're my representative. They're my calling card.
Yeah. All right. Well, I would suggest you do get your own website out there, because the world needs more information in this world of misinformation and disinformation. But let's start talking about some of the research that you've done into chemtrails, and let's start with just the basic explanation for people out there who are still new to this, who don't know the details. Let's explain it to them like they're 7-year-olds and have never observed this phenomenon. What is happening, and what really is behind this?
The motivation for planes flying over and leaving these lines that go from horizon to horizon is usually weather modification. This is the second generation of weather modification. The first one was basically you fly a plane over a cloud and you dump stuff into it, either to dry it up or make it rain. Now this second generation, known as geoengineering commonly, it employs space and ground-based support. The ground-based support is HARP, or technology like it, ionospheric heaters. And the space-based technology are the weather satellites that observe everything. And the stuff coming out of the plane that's emitted from the planes, and the ground-based support and the space-based support all work together over international lines on a global basis in order to modify the weather.
Now, let's talk about this concept of geoengineering, because again, some people out there might not be aware that this is something that's being openly talked about. There are conferences going on about the need for this type of modification. What is this science based on, and who are some of the people behind it?
Okay. Yeah. Well, you can trace it back to Edward Teller. Apparently, actually, I need to read some of their early stuff. I have a biography of him on the way. The subject is so huge that it's like every aspect of it is like a whole nother range of mountains, or a whole nother mountain, and the whole thing is like a big range of mountains. And I mean, it's like it's something that most people have never really heard too much about, but when you get into it, it's just vast oceans of science has been committed to, and national resources have been committed to this weather modification. I think the National Science Foundation has been instrumental in all of this. It looks like Los Alamos National Laboratory and was the other one, Livermore National Laboratory. It looks like those two have been instrumental in all of this. Edward Teller was at Stanford. Stanford also has produced Ken Caldeira, who is another famous geoengineer. There's if you just basically mention any of the nation's most prominent universities or applicable scientific organizations, they've done work in this area. It's like the geoengineers call it. It's really a new Manhattan project.
Well, California seems to have been on the map for a long time in terms of the research into this, and you have people like Barbara Peterson and others that are specifically working in that area. Tell us about your own experience in your area of the chemtrailing.
Well, this summer we haven't had too much in the way of chemtrails, and that was the same with last summer, just sort of sporadic events. A lot of people say that they're spraying offshore. A lot of the people that I really, listen to and value their opinion. This is one of the aspects that I need to look further into, but it does look like there is some evidence for this. Last winter they really let us have it with chemtrails. I mean, it was amazing, and I guess their timing couldn't have been better because they really let us have it with the trails right after a cover story in a local giveaway newspaper was talking about it. There was a hit piece on me actually, and it's the Pacific Sun. They had have a circulation of 85,000. And it was like right after, as soon as that article came out, and for a couple months afterward, we just got socked in with these things. I mean, people around here must have been just chomping at the bit because, once you're just provided with that idea and then you realize that it's going on, I mean, all it really takes is somebody to say, hey, those lines in the sky, they're spraying stuff out of planes. And the lines in the sky are like something that you just sort of subconsciously recognize over the years. I realized, looking back some years, that I subconsciously knew they were there. But when someone came out and told me, "Hey, watch out! They're spraying us," then you look up in the sky and you see these lines, and you're like, "Wow, this is actually going on," And that's exactly how it happened for me. It was, once I knew that was happening, it was like, okay, this is beyond my control. I've seen corruption throughout my life and known that the government's screwing us 7 ways to Sunday, but I had never been confronted with a situation that was so in my face and unavoidable. And I knew they were violating my body, and that was where I drew the line. I was like, okay, I'm done with this. I'm not participating in what I consider the establishment program anymore. Because, I mean, if you're just going to come over and just do this, well, then I'm going to fight you till the end. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, and it is one of those things that's kind of right there in front of people's face, and it's whether or not they choose to look up into the sky and see what they're seeing. Will they trust their lying eyes or what people are telling them to think about this? There is kind of that incredulity that a lot of people have about this type of information, because some people just can't get past that mental barrier that the government could do something like this, or that there would be people who would be interested in weather modification on this scale without putting everything in black and white for people in the New York Times or what have you. What can you say about that type of mental barrier and the resistance that or not that you've encountered to your work?
Well, yeah, I've encountered the whole gambit. As Goebbels said, the bigger the lie, the more people will believe it. It's just like 9/11. It's so huge. It's so unacceptable. It challenges people's worldview so drastically that they just don't want to go there. And it's sad that we've been worked into this type of situation. I think there have been times in American history where people have been much more politically active, and it was normal to question the establishment and everything. But now we got these dumbed down masses who just drop to their knees and worship the government at every opportunity. And it's just a matter of it's like going through your life with an open mind or a closed mind. I think people who just want to close their mind off to it, I mean, what is their social worth? What is their social value? I can't live like that. I have to fight for what I know is right. That's what fulfills me.
Well, I think that's a message that will resonate with a lot of the listeners to this program. So let's start talking about some of the information that you've uncovered about these programs and some of the people behind them. And let's just start by introducing people to something called Enron Weather, which you bring up in your article about geoengineering for financial gain through derivatives. What was Enron Weather, and how and when was it set up?
Yes, Enron Weather was a division of Enron. I'd have to reference my paper for the exact date, but it existed for about the last 5 years of the Enron fiasco, which ended in around 2001, and Enron Weather was the particular division within Enron that was known to buy and sell weather derivatives. Not only was Enron a player in the weather derivatives market, they originated the weather derivatives market. It came out of Enron. It was one of their little, experiments that was, came out, and it at first it didn't make much money for them. It was an experiment, as all experimental businesses are. They often need capital and stuff like that to get off the ground and take on money at first. But then, by the time of Enron's collapse, they were making money by Enron Weather. It was a money-making department. So people try to downplay the importance of Enron Weather. They say, "Oh, well, it was a tiny part and it only lost money." No, actually, by the time Enron went under, it was a significant part of Enron.
And just for people at home who might not be familiar with the derivatives market or how it works, I mean, these are bets basically that people are placing on different events taking place. Usually they're tied to the value of a commodity or a stock or something going up or down. But in this case, literally weather events, so that you could hedge against a bad weather for a farmer, for example, or something along those lines. So literally people placing bets on the weather. And if you're starting to get the sense of how that could play into a weather modification agenda, well, welcome to reality. It's not a pretty picture, but it's one that we have to start breaking down. So we're going to take another short break, but when we come back, we'll continue talking to Peter Kirby about his research into weather modification and weather derivatives. So we'll be back with more right after this.
Don't mean a thing. All you gotta do is swing.
All right, welcome back to the program, friends. Once again, this is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, and we're talking to author and researcher Peter A. Kirby about his work on weather derivatives, weather modification, and chemtrailing, and how all of this ties together. Just before the break there, we were talking a little bit from his article, Geoengineering for Financial Gain, A History of Weather Derivatives, and we were talking about how Enron Weather came about in the late 1990s to really become a significant part of the Enron fiasco, the scandal that we now know it was. But at the time, people were believing in it, and they were setting up these weather derivatives, this entire weather derivatives market, so that people could hedge against weather events or make money on weather events if they could predict the weather far enough in advance. But no one can do that, right? Well, the weather modification agenda takes on an entirely new twist when we start to take a look at those aspects of that. So Peter, let's continue to pick up this story and talk a little bit more about Enron Weather and really what became of it.
Okay. They went on doing their. I think they were also not only active in the weather derivatives market. It looks like they were also active in the catastrophe reinsurance market, which is the other market where you can make a lot of money off of things that happen in the weather. It's actually, that market is actually a lot bigger than the weather derivatives market, but it's not as sensational. It's kind of boring. It's like they have this place where they go in New York called the CADEX, where they negotiate these things. I mean, I suppose they negotiate them at other places too. Anyway, these big banks, they come up with bonds, and they may be actually only one or two bonds, a certificate, like actual bonds, and it'll just be like let's say a few $1 million bond or a $30 million bond or a $100 million bond, and then they chop it up into, they securitize it, and they chop it up into all these little pieces and sell it to the public. That market, the catastrophe reinsurance market, is murky. I actually bought a textbook about it. It cost $75, and it was one of the few good sources of information that I found on it. But it's hard to grasp that whole scene. But you can, just by web searches and things, you can see that it's much bigger. I think it's 2 or 3 times the size of the weather derivatives market, at least. And so I think Enron Weather was also involved in that. And they when they went under, they eventually were part of the Enron trading desk. And the trading desk somehow just had just fabulous successes all the time. I mean, oddly enough, if you look at a lot of financial businesses, you'll see that usually a lot of risk and a lot of investor doubt is attached to trading operations, but somehow Enron's trading operation only made money, and somehow they always knew how to make money, and they were known as part of the. They were considered probably one of the most or the most stable part of their operation. While everyone else it's a very risky venture for anyone else. And anyway, their trading desk, when Enron went under, was a valuable commodity because they had a lot of proprietary technology, including the original formats of the trading platforms for the weather derivatives market. And when Enron went under in 2001, the trading desk was eventually acquired by UBS Warburg.
Warburg, where have I heard that name before? Exactly right. Well, for those people out there who don't remember or don't know about the Enron story and its political connections that made it into such a formidable beast, really, there on all sorts of derivatives markets and in the energy market, etc. Let's talk a little bit about their connections to the Bush crime syndicate and the various other aspects of the Carlyle Group and some of these other players.
Yeah, they're the Bush family. They try to downplay their connections to Enron, but as far as I could tell, and all the evidence shows that they were in bed with Enron as much as anybody could be, and there's so many conflicts of interest and such an amazing revolving door between government and the Enron Corporation. It's It's as you can see in the paper, they had who was it? It wasn't only Bush Senior and W. Basically, what they did for Enron, what Bush Senior and Junior did for Enron was a little something called deregulation, and basically what they did was create a situation. I guess they deregulation. They took away regulations, but it was more like just setting up the whole energy industry for Enron to have little back doors so they can arbitrage trades and just make money on. I guess that's how their trading desk made money all the time, because they had the political insiders who set up the game for them so that they could just make all these arbitrage trades. Your listeners probably know what arbitrage is, and it wasn't only Big Daddy Bush and Junior taking care of them on the deregulation front. Jeb Bush, our wonderful leader down there in Florida, he was getting some too with his repiping the swamp down there. Just the useless projects that do nothing but just put big checks on his dinner table.
Unfortunately so, absolutely right. Well, again, there's a lot to be said on that. I hope people will check out The Smartest Guys in the Room, the documentary, where they expose some of the ways that Enron was manipulating those markets. But we'll be back after this. Welcome back to Corbett Report Radio, ladies and gentlemen. You are tuned into Republic Broadcasting, and this is James Corbett of CorbettReport.com. Tonight we're talking to author and researcher Peter A. Kirby about his research into chemtrails, weather manipulation, weather modification, weather derivatives, and all of the other aspects of this chemtrail geoengineering agenda. So, Peter, let's talk a little bit more about this weather modification and how it can be used for other purposes. We have been talking about the financial gain that can be made when people know what weather events are coming, or can at least engineer those events into happening through catastrophe reinsurance, through weather derivatives, those types of options and derivatives and markets. But let's talk about some of the other ways that this can be used. And I think the one that naturally presents itself right away to most people is the idea of warfare. And certainly there's no better way to wage war on an enemy than to deprive them of rain, for example. And recently it's even been talked about on Yahoo News and mainstream quote-unquote publications, the idea that Iran is having its rain clouds stopped by forces unknown, and certainly that type of idea is one that's quite scary, because it does really represent the 21st century state of warfare. Let's talk a little bit about this concept of weather warfare and what research we might have to back this up.
Yes. I think I'm not an expert on war or the history of war, but I've heard of instances, going back to thousands of years ago. Well, you could look at natural phenomenon. I'm sure you've heard of there was something, I'm not completely familiar with this incident, but there was something back in the history of Japan where some big typhoon happened, and the invaders from China were not able to reach Japan, and they were defeated. I mean, there's lots of, natural occurrences going back thousands of years. But the military has been very interested in modifying the weather, as far as I can tell, since about 1960, 1965. I found this document that looks like it's from about 1985, 1986. It's actually undated, but the latest dates I could find in it was 85. So I'm thinking 86, 87, actually. And it's called, oddly enough, it looks like the Department of Defense did kind of an internal audit, and they produced this case study, and it's called Weather Modification, the Evolution of an R&D Program into a Military Operation. And it basically tells the whole story of today's weather control programs. And I have it right here, and I'd like to read some portions from it, if you don't mind.
Go ahead. I'm absolutely riveted to hear about it.
Okay, I've made a few notes here. Let me scroll down and find the first one. Okay, now I've found that this guy, in particular, this guy, Admiral William F. Raborn, was very instrumental in the early weather modification programs that eventually became today's second generation weather modification programs, because he, in this one quote here, you'll see he talks about influencing the ionosphere. This is the earliest reference that I've seen of this. And not only was this guy, William F. Raborn, writing about influencing the ionosphere, he was also on the board of directors of this company that this company called LTV Electrosystems, Ling Temco Vought Electrosystems. Ling Temco Vought was a big defense contractor back in the 1950s, 1960s, and they had a division called LTV Electrosystems, which eventually became E-Systems, which eventually built HARP. So he was on the board of directors of this company that eventually built HARP. And here it is. Here he's quoted in this paper here, this paper called Weather Modification, the Evolution of an R&D Program into a Military Operation. It says, in 1963, Admiral William F. Raborn, previously responsible for the Polaris SLBM development program, and then Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Development, included the following description in an article titled, quote, New Horizons of Naval Research and Development. And he writes, the possibilities for the military employment of the, quote, weather weapon may be as diverse as they are numerous. Now, that when I hear that, I think of HARP and all the different functions that HARP can perform. Okay, and he continues, an ability to control the weather could introduce greater changes in warfare than those which occurred in 1945 with the explosion of the first nuclear weapons. He goes on later to write, by influencing the ionosphere and atmosphere simultaneously, magnetic, acoustic, and pressure effects might be generated in such a way that ocean-wide sweeping of mines would occur. In other words, he's saying you could stir up the ocean enough so that you could just make mines in the ocean go off through, creating a big storm with, influencing the ionosphere. Let's see what else we got here.
And just to back up what that's talking about, for people who don't know, HARP is an ionospheric heater. It generates the heat in the ionosphere itself, and the manipulation of the atmosphere, of course, is the laying of the chemtrails themselves, which has been speculated to be part of a HAARP system to allow HAARP to influence further out than it normally would be able to. And that's exactly what he's referring to. There are ionospheric and atmospheric changes.
Right, absolutely. Let's see, I got some more stuff here. They go on about how we have to develop this technology because, if we don't, the Russians will. There's a big Russian threat. Apparently that was a big way to propel these programs through the old Russian propaganda. And this document started me really looking hard at the National Science Foundation because they mention it many times, and many times I actually just refer to it as the foundation. And they write in this report. They write that basically the program is largely directed by the National Science Foundation. And then it goes on to say here, we're getting into the history of weather warfare, used by the United States. It says here, it was the United States, that was the first nation to use weather modification as a weapon in war. This took place in an extensive program in the Indochina theater from 1967 to 1972. This is quite well known. We're talking about the Operation Popeye, and it goes under some other names. Those documents, there's a document that was declassified, is available on the internet. I don't have the name of it, but it talked all about these operations in Southeast Asia. It continues here. It was able to continue for 5 years over the territory of several different nations, Laos, Cambodia, North and South Vietnam. And with this knowledge of its existence available to some 1,400 persons before its disclosure. See, so they're talking about the relative secrecy of these programs. And this case study is actually quite critical of the Department of Defense and how they go about developing these programs, as we'll see down here. They say, hold on, let me get this quote here. Sorry.
No problem. There's a lot of information there.
Yeah, I'm having to scroll down here. I made a little... No, okay, here we go. All of these programs, the technological ones and the tactical ones, shared one thing in common: either total secrecy or secrecy as long as was manageable. Now, does that sound like what's going on today?
It, oddly enough, yes, it does. And this is exactly the type of point that I was addressing in a recent podcast episode talking about secret weapons technology, where we are expected to believe that the SR-71 or whatever they unveiled 20 years ago is really the epitome, the height of the technology. And nowadays, to think that there's anything going on behind the scenes that we don't know about is just craziness. But of course, we can see through that. But unfortunately, it's a question of how do you get to what is really going on behind that curtain that they have erected. And it is definitely picking through a minefield of misinformation and disinformation. So documents like this one are extremely valuable. Can you give us the title of that document again?
Right. It's called Weather Modification, the Evolution of an R&D Program into a Military Operation.
Yeah, it doesn't get much more explicit than that, does it?
Right. A little further down, this is where they start getting really critical about how the Department of Defense handled these operations. Here it says, anyone familiar with the development of chemical and biological weaponry and argumentation in its favor will instantly recognize the precisely similar general arguments here. These are the arguments of the Department of Defense as to why these programs should remain secret, and and how they go about providing cover for these operations. It says here, this is what the Department of Defense does. This report is being critical. They say, implicit or explicit labeling of arguments in opposition to weapon development and use as emotional. That's a little confusing, but they go on to say, its own recommendation put forward as scientific. So this is like their modus operandi surrounding these projects. The claim that use is innocuous. I mean, I think that's what's coming next. when the government finally admits it, they're going to say, "Oh yeah, we're spraying you, but don't worry about it. It's no big deal," just like they did with DU. And then,
Yep.
and then it goes on, an extremely narrow framework ruling possible further developments, more serious or more widespread use out of consideration as speculative, though one knows this to be the historical process with every newly introduced weapons system. The claim, see here. The pretense that this weapon category would be a, quote, replacement for other weapons rather than an increment to them. See, this is what one of their arguments is. Oh, well, we'll just hit them with the weather control. No, we won't hit them with all everything at the same time, rather than an increment to them, used together with all the existing, wants to increase their total lethality. And then the last one is the most scathing. The blind eye turned to the historical experience that the most innocuous weapon use or uses for ostensibly special circumscribed situations are often purposefully presented to win approval for the entry of a new weapon system into the armory. So, I mean, that there's the Army, there's the Department of Defense itself, with its own little internal audit saying, this is, you guys are handling this all the wrong way. You're keeping it secret. You're, doing a bait and switch. You're just, trying to develop your little weapons because you get off on your little mad science projects and stuff. I mean, that's not even me saying it. That's our own military saying it. I mean, this is a pattern of behavior by the establishment that it can be applied to what's going on today.
Absolutely, it can. And what do you think about that? What they're saying there? Because obviously, it is true. If they just admit to it and just say, "Oh, it's no big deal," most people will go along with that. Don't you think?
That's the lemming mentality, and that's not what America's about. That's collectivism. That's not individualism. I believe in individualism. I don't think there's a future for humanity in just listening to and just taking for granted what this establishment says to us. I mean, these are the same people who crucified Christ, right? Am I wrong? I mean, do we have different people in power now? Was there somehow, some kind of revolution in the power structure? I don't buy it. I mean, it's the same families that have been oppressing humanity for hundreds and thousands of years. You can trace the lineage all back. And so, I mean, these are the same people, and you got to expect that they're going to behave in the same manner when put in a similar situation. It's what I call a candy-coated tyranny. It's it's everything's presented as so good and wonderful. No, the royal family, they got married. Well, let's go out and cheer them on because I don't know, they kind of look good, and he's got a nice suit on and her hair looks nice, and look at the golden carriage. Oh, wonderful. Anyway, I don't buy it. I mean...
And I wouldn't recommend anyone else out there, too. I think a lot of people can see through this, but it's the people who can't that it's kind of head-scratching at this point. Why wouldn't they be able to? But let's bring this into perspective for people. So where do you think we are in terms of the implementation of this agenda? Do you think it's still in a more research and development phase, or do you think it's in its full implementation? Where and how do you think they're going to be using this to its fullest advantage?
I think it's in full implementation, and they're trying to privatize the whole thing through this idea of geoengineering. They just went ahead and did it. They've been doing it since mid '90s. So that's coming up on 20 years now. This is, and anyone who's paying attention can see the way the government goes about doing anything. They just go ahead and do it. They just go ahead and do it, and then they leave it to everyone else to pick up the pieces. And that's I'm not really happy that I have to go and pick up the pieces, but I feel as though it's my civic duty.
And that of everyone listening as well, certainly. If we don't take it upon ourselves to start exposing this information, who will? And I think you're right to point out that, unfortunately, the governments just like to act and let people pick up the pieces in their wake. And that was expressed probably most boldly by Karl Rove at a press correspondence dinner where he declared that we make reality and you just report on it. So it is the sickness of the so-called would-be elites who like to believe that they control reality, that they just implement an agenda and let people kind of, find their way through it. It leaves us in a very difficult position. I mean, what do you think it is that people out there can be doing against this agenda?
Well, actually in the city of San Francisco, I've been seeing someone's going around with a piece of chalk in their hand, and they just right on the sidewalk. This person, or maybe it's more than one person, is quite prolific. They just right on the sidewalk look up, you are being sprayed. If that doesn't grab your attention, I don't know if anything will.
Absolutely. Well, direct action like that. But of course, we've seen recently that they've tried to prosecute people for writing on the sidewalk 9/11 truth messages in chalk, etc. So unfortunately, they're cracking down in every possible way, and it's getting more and more blatant. All right, well, time flies. We are coming up against our final break here, so we're going to take a short breather, and we'll be back to wrap things up, once again talking to Peter Kirby about the weather modification agenda, how it's being implemented, how it affects you, and how we can strike back against it. So stay tuned right there. We'll be back after these messages.
Turn it up! I want my bailout money. Keep the bills coming. Sweet green cash just dripping like honey. I'm a new kind of...
All right, friends, welcome back. We are in the final moments of tonight's edition of Corbett Report Radio. Once again, I'm your host, James Corbett of CorbettReport.com. Tonight we're talking to Peter A. Kirby, the author of Chemtrails Exposed, which again is available through Amazon.com. as an ebook in progress, and continues to be added to, so you can check that out at Amazon. Peter, I've been peppering you with questions all night. Any other facts, details, names, dates, or figures you'd like to throw out for the audience there?
Okay, as far as the military's involvement in the weather modification stuff, there's a couple of other documents that I think are quite applicable. Of course, Owning the Weather 2025, the weather, it was I can't even talk now, a report issued by the Department of Defense and the Air Force, and that is the seminal document because it outlines the whole program. It talks about how using the ground and space-based support. It's a document that outlines this second generation of weather modification programs. That's why it's so important. There hasn't been any other government document that has been so explicit as to how these programs work. That's one to look at. And then, there's another book called Unless Peace Comes. It was edited by this guy, Nigel Calder. And in it, this guy named Gordon J.F. MacDonald, who was a big muckety-muck in the president's, he was like a science advisor to the president and, head of some scientific department elsewhere and this and that. He wrote a little article called How to Wreck the Environment. And in it, he's basically full of bravado, and he's just basically saying like, yeah, well, we're just going to come in, we're going to do this, and that's the way it is. You don't like it, tough. And he talks about all these different schemes of basically geoengineering type things. Those I would say are probably the three most important as far as the military programs go. And then that last thing I wanted to talk about was the other topic we were talking about earlier, Enron. There was a guy at Enron named Richard Kinder. And you may have heard of him because he, right before Enron collapsed, he had the presence of mind to get out. And he was the guy there. He was really running things on a day-to-day basis. He was one of the people that would necessarily have to know about any scams involved with the weather derivatives. If they were receiving inside information or anything like that, he would have known about it. Him, Ken Lay, and a handful of other guys. But this guy Richard Kinder is quite interesting because he got out unscathed before Enron went down. And he was able to go on, and he went and formed his own company called Kinder Morgan, gas pipeline company. And he left with their most valuable asset, which was actual gas pipelines. They actually owned assets at one point. But when Richard Kinder left, he took those with him. Yeah, magically somehow he was able to get out of there with their most valuable assets, and he went and formed his company Kinder Morgan. Now, am I wrong, or was Kinder Morgan bought by Berkshire Hathaway? Do they own a stake? I seem to recall hearing this story a couple of years ago. Now I can't find it, but I see, because I follow stocks and stuff, and I seem to recall it was a few years ago. Berkshire Hathaway, I thought they acquired a majority stake in it or something, and I just can't find that information. I have to I guess I have to pore over the annual reports and things, but Richard Kinder looks very interesting in this whole thing.
Absolutely. Well, another fascinating trail for people to follow, so I hope they will follow your work and your articles once again at Activist Post and other alternative websites out there. Peter A. Kirby. Unfortunately, we're completely out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you for your time tonight. I do appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
All right, excellent. Well, to everyone out there, thank you for listening. I'll be with you tomorrow night. Take care.